You ever notice how the smallest things can tell you your life has changed forever? Not the big things, not the hospital machines, or the lawyer's papers. No, sometimes it's just a key, a little piece of metal that used to fit, and suddenly it doesn't. That was me standing on the porch of my son's house, fingers stiff from the November cold, twisting a key I'd used 100 times before. Only this time, it didn't turn. Not stiff, not jammed. Just wrong. The porch light hummed overhead, buzzing like it always did when the bulb was about to go. Same chipped blue paint on the steps, the same potted fern that I watered all summer, even after everyone else forgot about it. But the house didn't feel like mine anymore. It didn't even feel like I was welcome to stand there. And I thought, so this is how it happens. Not with a fight, not with screaming, but with silence. A lock changed in the middle of the night. Let me go back. Because you can't understand the weight of that moment unless you know how the ground had already started shifting under me. It was just 2 nights earlier when my phone rang. I remember because I was folding laundry, the news humming low on the TV, and the smell of soup still hanging in the kitchen. That's when the voice on the other end told me my son Noah had been in an accident at the construction site. A beam, a fall, something about the scaffolding giving way. All I heard was ICU. I drove faster than I should have. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. County General was lit up like a ship on the edge of the river, and the minute I walked in, I smelled antiseptic and burnt coffee. And I swear, I felt every nerve in my body fire at once. Vanessa, my daughter-in-law, was already there. Mascara streaks hair pulled back, clutching her phone in one hand like she was fielding calls from the president. She rushed to me, held my hands in both of hers and whispered, "He needs both of us now." And for one moment, I believed her. But not 12 hours later, I was told I couldn't go back in to see him. Family only, they said. She told the nurses too much stimulation wasn't good for him, that I'd upset his recovery. She said it with that voice of hers, polite calm, just sweet enough to sound convincing. Like honey laced with vinegar. I was a nurse once. I knew how things worked in a hospital. I knew when a woman was lying through her teeth. Still, I told myself it was temporary. I told myself to be patient. The next morning, I drove home to shower to change clothes. My back ached from the stiff hospital chair, and I just wanted 10 minutes of normal. But when I slid my key into the lock, it wouldn't turn. I tried again, and again. My heart dropped before my mind even caught up. I knocked. No answer. I tried calling Vanessa, straight to voicemail. I circled to the back door, the one that always groaned when you opened it too fast. It didn't groan. It didn't even move. Dead bolted. That's when I saw the envelope, taped to the mailbox like some cruel afterthought. Inside was a hotel keycard and 4 words scribbled in her neat little handwriting. "This is for now." I just stood there staring at those words like they might rearrange themselves if I glared long enough. The neighbor's dog barked at me like I was a stranger. Maybe I was. My name was on that mortgage. My money went into that down payment. I had folded every towel in that linen closet. But suddenly, none of it mattered. I drove to the motel, the kind off Route 7 where the curtains never quite close and the vending machines always out of the good chips. The bedspread smelled like bleach and lemon, but the scent didn't clean anything, not really. I sat on the edge of the mattress coat, still buttoned, my hospital badge hanging from my neck. I stared at the tiny bottle of lotion on the dresser. The label said, "Renewal." I laughed a sharp, bitter sound, because what kind of sick joke was that? Renewal. That first night, I didn't cry. Not once. I didn't scream either. I just sat there listening to the heater rattle against the cold, staring at the crack in the wallpaper. Because the truth is, sometimes pain doesn't come loud. Sometimes it comes quiet, like a hand pressing down on your chest, just enough to keep you from breathing right. I thought about all the Sundays I'd given up so Vanessa could make the house hers. How I'd moved my late husband's picture from the mantel so she could put up her new candles. How I smiled when she started calling the living room her space. I swallowed every little slight like it was nothing, because that's what you do for family, right? And yet, here I was, sitting in a motel with a plastic keycard and 4 words that told me everything I needed to know. I wasn't wanted. Still, hope is a stubborn thing. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself when Noah woke up, he'd put it all right. He'd tell her to unlock the doors to give me back my seat at the table. But deep down, I knew. Vanessa wasn't just locking me out of the house. She was already rewriting the story of who belonged and who didn't. And that night, I made a promise to myself. I didn't say it out loud, but I felt it in my bones. I might have been shut out. I might have been erased from the photos, the documents, the bedside chair. But I wasn't gone. Not yet. And one day, she was going to learn just how hard it is to erase a woman who spent her whole life fighting to stay. The second night in that motel, I sat on the floor by the window instead of the bed. The carpet smelled like old cigarettes, even though the sign on the door said, non-smoking. I kept the lights off, just watching the parking lot glow under the flickering street lamp. Every so often, headlights would sweep across the curtains, but they never stopped for me. That's how I felt like life was moving past me, not even slowing down to notice. I had my phone in my hand, waiting for it to light up. Maybe the hospital, maybe Noah, maybe even Vanessa pretending she cared enough to check in. But the screen stayed black. Until at 3:47 a.m., it didn't. A bank alert. Withdrawal 2 on 15. Withdrawal 6 on 40. And then the big one. Withdrawal $670,000. Source insurance claim. Name Noah Carter. Purpose emergency payout. I read it 3 times, then a 4th. My hands went cold, my chest tight. That policy wasn't just a number. It was the settlement Noah got years back after the factory roof collapse. He kept the premiums high because, in his words, "Mom, if something ever happens, I want you safe." Safe. But now, while he was lying in a hospital bed with tubes in his throat, someone had cashed it all out. $670,000. Gone. And the only person with access besides him was Vanessa. I stared at the screen until the words blurred. Then I remembered something. Months ago, Noah had added my email as a backup contact for security. He never bothered to take it off. That's the only reason I even saw it. A ghost in the system. Forgotten. That's when I realized Vanessa hadn't just locked me out of the house. She was trying to lock me out of everything. My place in Noah's life. Our money. Our home. Even the future he had promised would keep us both safe. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. Instead, I opened the drawer of the motel nightstand and pulled out the hotel notepad. On the first page in shaky handwriting, I wrote, "What's missing?" And I made a list. My house key. My seat at Noah's bedside. My name on the insurance. My place in the family. It was a short list, but it felt endless because every item wasn't just a thing. It was a piece of me. By morning, I drove to the hospital again. I thought maybe, just maybe, I could slip past Vanessa. But when I got to the nurse's station, the woman clicked a few keys, looked over her shoulder, and whispered, "I'm sorry, ma'am. He's been upgraded to private status. Family only." Family only. That phrase sat in my stomach like lead. I left without a word, went straight to the public library. The computers were old, humming loud, but they were free. I printed the co-ownership deed for the house. My name was still on it. Then I pulled up the insurance documents. The version I had was over a year old, and back then my name was listed as co-beneficiary. I needed a new copy, a current one, but I couldn't find it online. On my way out, I noticed a flyer taped crooked on the bulletin board. Free legal advice for seniors. Wednesdays 2 p.m. at First Baptist Church. It was Monday. I stuffed it into my purse anyway. That night, back at the motel, I sat cross-legged on the floor, the list in front of me. I added one more line. My voice. Because that's what she'd taken most of all. She'd silenced me. Told the world I was no one. But maybe I thought maybe it wasn't permanent. The next day, I ran into Miss Carroll at the diner off Main Street. She was my old neighbor, retired English teacher, sharp as a tack, even at 72. She looked at me with those piercing blue eyes and said, "Rachel, you look like a woman carrying stones in her chest." I almost laughed. She always had a way of seeing straight through the mask. I told her not everything, but enough. Enough about the lock, about the motel, about the money. She didn't interrupt. She just sipped her coffee, then leaned forward. "You keep every scrap of paper, you hear me? Every email, every note, every receipt? Paper doesn't lie." I nodded, and for the first time in days, I felt less alone. That Wednesday, I went to the church basement. Fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, rows of folding chairs. A young man in corduroy pants listened while I told my story. He didn't say much, just scribbled on a yellow legal pad. When I finished, he tore out a page and handed me a business card. "Call this woman," he said. "She deals with estate fraud." Quietly. Her name was Trina Delgado. That night, I didn't sit on the floor. I didn't keep my shoes on. I actually let myself slip between the stiff motel sheets because something in me felt different. Not safe, not yet, but steadier. I kept replaying Miss Carroll's words in my head. Paper doesn't lie. Vanessa might have erased me from photos from hospital visits from Noah's bedside. But somewhere in black ink on some forgotten form, my name still lived. And if I could find it, if I could prove it, then maybe, just maybe, I could write myself back in. That's how it started, not with revenge, not with rage, but with a notepad list, a neighbor's advice, and the stubborn refusal to disappear quietly. Because the truth, you can lock a door, you can change the key, but you can't erase a woman who remembers every detail. And I remembered everything. You ever notice how lies look neat until you shine a light on them? That's what happened the night everything cracked wide open. It wasn't in a courtroom, not yet. It wasn't behind some fancy lawyer's desk. It happened in the church basement, right under the flickering fluorescent lights at a fundraiser for the high school band. Funny, isn't it? After all the motel nights, the bank alerts, the whispered family only at the hospital, my chance came between crock pots of chili and styrofoam cups of lemonade. I hadn't planned to go. God knows I didn't feel like small talk. But Miss Carroll called me that afternoon. "You show up, Rachel," she said, sharp as ever. "People need to see your face, not the story she's been telling about you." I almost argued. Almost told her I was too tired, too worn down. But then I remembered that list I'd been keeping. What's missing? My voice was still on it. And maybe this was my chance to take it back. So I went. The basement smelled of coffee and cornbread, the kind of smell that wraps itself into the walls. Kids were running back and forth with raffle tickets. Pastor Jim was telling some story about his glory days as quarterback, and the women from the quilting circle had already claimed the best seats. Vanessa was there, of course. She glided in like she owned the place. Hair perfect, boots new, her smile wide enough to hide every ugly thing she'd done. She leaned against the donation table, whispering to the mayor's wife like they were sorority sisters. And I stood in the corner, clutching a folder I hadn't let out of my sight since Trina gave it to me. Inside were the papers, the insurance forms, the trust documents, the handwriting samples. Proof. The band director called for attention, thanking everyone for showing up. People clapped, kids cheered. Then came the raffle. And when they asked for a volunteer to read out numbers, my hand moved before my brain caught up. I walked to the front. My legs shook, but my voice didn't. Not this time. I read the first number, then the second. Laughter, groans, kids waving their tickets. Normal. Ordinary. But when the last prize was done, I didn't step away. I cleared my throat instead. Before we all leave tonight, I said there's something the community should know. The room shifted. Chairs scraped. People turned. Even the kids went quiet, sensing something bigger than a raffle. I laid the old church ledger on the table. Thick, worn pages yellowed with time. Years ago, I used to keep it sign-in sheets, donation logs, signatures from every fundraiser. Nobody thought it mattered. But I did. Paper doesn't lie. I flipped to a page dated 3 weeks ago. There in black ink was a shaky signature. Noah Carter. The same day he was in surgery. I held it up. This is my son's signature, supposedly. Gasps. Murmurs. Even Pastor Jim leaned forward. But I've seen my boy's handwriting since he was 6 years old. This, I tapped the page. This isn't his hand. This is someone trying to be him. I opened the folder, then pulling out the insurance transfer document. The one Vanessa had pushed through. I laid it beside the ledger. Same shaky loops, same crooked tail on the Y. Look close, I told them. It matches. But not because Noah signed it. Because someone copied the same forgery twice. The silence was heavy, like the whole room was holding its breath. Vanessa laughed first, that high, brittle laugh she used when cornered. "Rachel, please," she said, voice sugary. "You're confused. These documents—" "Paper doesn't lie," I cut in. And Miss Carol, bless her, spoke up from the back. "She's right. I graded that boy's papers for years. That's not Noah's writing." That's when the room shifted again. Whispers. Eyes darting toward Vanessa. Doubt seeping in. I went on steady now. While my son was unconscious, signatures appeared. Trusts were changed. Insurance payouts drained. And if you think I'm mistaken, I lifted the folder, shaking just enough to rattle the papers. The bank cameras have it too. Her face, her hand. Not his. You could have heard a pin drop. Vanessa's smile cracked. Just a hairline fracture at first, then wider. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. The mayor's wife stepped back from her like she'd touched something hot. And me, I didn't gloat, didn't shout. I just stood there, voice calm, heart steady, for the first time in weeks, because the truth was finally in the open. Not tucked in a folder, not whispered in a lawyer's office. Out loud, in front of everyone. That's the thing about small towns. Gossip spreads faster than fire, but so does truth if you're brave enough to say it. I gathered my papers, tucked them under my arm, and walked off that little stage. Nobody stopped me. Nobody dared. Behind me, I heard Pastor Jim clear his throat. "Well," he said, slow and heavy, "looks like we got some reckoning to do." I didn't look back at Vanessa. I didn't need to. I could feel her panic filling the room like smoke. All I knew was this: for the first time since that lock had changed, I wasn't erased. I was standing in the light again. And she was the one trapped in the shadows. The thing about truth is once it's spoken out loud, it doesn't go back in the box. It just sits there, heavy, undeniable, until people have no choice but to face it. After that night in the church basement, I didn't sleep. Not because I was scared anymore, but because for the first time in weeks, I felt awake. Wide awake. By morning, half the town knew. People I hadn't heard from in years were calling, sending messages, leaving pies on my motel doorstep like they didn't know what else to do. That's how small towns work silence when you're down casseroles, when you start climbing back up. Vanessa, though, she went quiet. No more big entrances, no more laughing too loud at the diner. She still drove that shiny SUV through town, but she kept her sunglasses on, windows rolled up tight. Folks noticed. They always do. And then something shifted. 2 days later, I got a call from County General. Not from Vanessa. From a nurse. Her voice was warm, steady. She said, "Rachel, your son opened his eyes today. He can't say much yet, but when I said your name, he looked right at me. I sat there on the edge of the motel bed, phone pressed to my ear, and I swear my whole body trembled. Relief, anger, hope, all of it rolled together. Noah was still in there. That afternoon, I walked to the hospital. I didn't go inside, not yet. But I sat on the bench across the street, clutching a cup of coffee I didn't drink, staring up at the ICU window, like I could will myself through the glass. At 3 horror sharp, Vanessa's SUV pulled in. She marched in with that leather folder she always carried, lips pressed tight. She wasn't crying anymore. She wasn't even pretending to. And I thought, she knows. She knows time is running out. Back at the motel, I made a new list. Not of what I'd lost this time, but of what she hadn't expected. I kept copies of the old deed. I had Noah's real handwriting tucked away in shoeboxes. I had Miss Carroll, who wasn't afraid to speak up in public. And now, I had Trina Delgado. That list made me stronger than any lock, any lawyer, any half-smile Vanessa could throw at me. A week later, Trina called with news. The courts agreed to freeze the assets tied to the trust, she said. Vanessa won't be moving a single dollar without approval. I closed my eyes, let that sink in. It wasn't victory, not yet, but it was like someone finally put brakes on a runaway truck. Meanwhile, whispers followed Vanessa everywhere. At the grocery store, women turned their carts the other way. At church, she sat alone in the pew, fiddling with her phone like it could shield her. Her smile had gone brittle like glass, about to shatter. And me, I started to feel human again. I walked back into the house for the first time with a sheriff's deputy by my side. Vanessa stood in the hallway, arms crossed, trying to look unaffected. But her eyes betrayed her darting to the closet, to the shelves, to the box I knew she'd rather I never touched. I didn't linger. Didn't snoop. Just walked to the hall closet and pulled out the shoebox I'd remembered filled with Noah's cards notes, his teenage scrawl on old report cards. Proof. I tucked it under my arm and walked out without a word. But as I passed the family photos on the wall, my chest tightened. My face had been cut out of the frames. Tiny beige squares where my head once was. That hurt more than the locks. More than the motel. More than the cold notes. Because it wasn't just about money anymore. She wanted to erase me completely. That night, I sat in Trina's office as we scanned every signature, every scribble. Side by side, they told a story clearer than any courtroom speech. Real versus fake. Authentic versus forced. Truth versus a lie in shaky ink. When Trina called the insurance company, she didn't mince words. "We have proof of forgery," she said. "Freeze the payout, begin investigation." And just like that, the tide shifted. But the fallout wasn't just financial. It was personal. Noah's recovery moved slow but steady. He could whisper words, now short and broken. The first time he said, "Mom," I nearly fell apart right there in the parking lot because it meant he remembered. He hadn't forgotten me no matter how hard she tried. Vanessa, on the other hand, started making mistakes. She rushed, she panicked. She filed new paperwork that contradicted the old. She tried to move money into accounts out of state, but the banks flagged it. Every move she made dug her hole deeper, and the community she once charmed. They started to see her clearly. At the post office, old Mrs. Dugan shook her head when Vanessa walked past. At the diner, the waitress who used to fuss over her almond milk lattes started bringing her regular black coffee without asking. Small things maybe, but in a small town, small things are everything. Meanwhile, I started piecing my life back together, one quiet step at a time. I left the motel for a small rental on the edge of town. Nothing fancy, just 2 rooms and a crooked porch, but it was mine. The first night there, I unpacked slowly, one box at a time, letting the rhythm of it calm me. I planted 2 pots of marigolds on the porch just because I could. And when I looked in the mirror for the first time in weeks, I saw someone I recognized. Not a victim, not a ghost. A woman still standing. The rebuilding wasn't about money or houses or even public opinion. It was about breath, about not waking every morning in panic, about sitting with a cup of coffee and knowing I wasn't erased. Vanessa was unraveling. I could see it in her face when she crossed the courthouse steps, jaw-tight, phone pressed hard to her ear. The whispers weren't about me anymore. They were about her. And me, I stayed quiet. Because sometimes the strongest thing you can do is let your enemy burn themselves down. By the time Noah was moved out of ICU, I knew the tide had fully turned. He was thinner, pale, but his eyes, those were my boy's eyes again. He reached for my hand, whispered I didn't sign. I squeezed his hand. I know. And in that moment, everything Vanessa had tried to take collapsed in front of her. Because the truth wasn't just in documents or court orders. It was in his voice. And once he spoke it, there was no undoing it. That was the beginning of the end for her. And the beginning of my rebuilding. When people ask me how it ended, I never tell them it was in the courthouse. Because endings don't happen in wood-paneled rooms with judges and lawyers. Endings happen in kitchens, in gardens, in the quiet places where you finally hear your own breath again. Yes, the judge ruled. She froze, the trust nullified the forged documents, and barred Vanessa from touching another dime of Noah's assets. Restitution was ordered. The insurance company promised to reissue what had been stolen. On paper, it was a win, but real closure that came slower, softer. The first day, I stepped back into my house, the one with the blue porch steps and the buzzing light. I didn't fling the door open in triumph. I just stood there, keys in my hand, staring at the lock. The same lock that once shut me out. This time, it turned easily. Inside, everything looked the same, and nothing looked the same. My chair was gone from the sunroom. My face was cut out from the family photos. The air smelled too clean, like lemon cleaner, trying to scrub away memory. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just walked room to room, touching the walls, the door frames, the edges of picture hooks where my husband's photo once hung. This house had survived storms, deaths, and now betrayal. And so had I. I unpacked slowly. Not to reclaim what was mine, but to remind myself who I was. One photo on the mantel, one quilt folded at the end of the couch, one pot of soup simmering on the stove. Small things, quiet things, but each one said, I'm still here. Noah came home weeks later, thinner than I'd ever seen him, walking slower, but his eyes steady. He didn't move into the master bedroom with Vanessa anymore. She was gone, and this house had no place for her shadow. He took the guest room carried in his old duffel bag without fanfare. I handed him fresh sheets and told him the window sticks when it's too dry. That was our language now, simple, practical, no need for speeches. We moved around each other like people learning a new dance. He fixed the porch railing. I cooked dinner. He folded laundry without being asked. Small, ordinary gestures that meant everything after the silence she had built around us. One night after dinner, I placed the envelope from the insurance company in front of him, the reissued payout. He frowned. Mom, this should be yours. I shook my head. It's for both of us. But I've set up a new trust. You'll have access when I'm gone. Not before. He didn't argue. He just nodded, eyes wet. Because he understood. Boundaries weren't punishment. They were survival. And me, I found peace in the ordinary again. I replanted the front garden marigolds, petunias, a row of tomatoes. The soil was still good. I spent mornings drinking coffee at the kitchen window, the same spot I once gave up so Vanessa could play her podcasts. This time, no one moved me aside. I started volunteering again at the senior center. The first Friday back, Nancy hugged me tight and said, Your casseroles were the only ones with flavor. We laughed, and for the first time in months, it felt like life wasn't just surviving, it was living. But maybe the most important thing I did was open the old church ledger one last time. The one I used to keep the one that exposed everything. On the last page in my own steady hand, I wrote, Rachel Carter, still here. Because legacy isn't about money. It isn't even about family pictures on a wall. Legacy is about not letting anyone erase your name from the story you built. Vanessa tried. She nearly succeeded. But the truth outlasted her lies. And the truth has a way of planting roots deeper than betrayal ever can. Now when I sit on the porch at dusk watching the sun dip behind the trees, I think about all the women out there who've been told they don't belong in their own story. Who've been cut out, silenced, replaced. To them, I'd say this silence isn't loyalty, and silence isn't consent. There comes a time when you have to speak even if your voice shakes. I thought my legacy would be the house, the money, the family name. But it wasn't. My legacy was learning that dignity doesn't have an expiration date. That healing isn't about revenge. It's about reclaiming the pieces of yourself no one has the right to take. So when people ask me where it all ended, I smile. Because it didn't end in court. It ended in the garden with dirt under my nails. It ended at the kitchen table with a notebook and a pen. It ended in my son's quiet, steady voice when he said, Mom, I'm sorry. And it ended in my reply, you came back. That's enough. Everything else, that's just paperwork.